And welcome everybody back to the Craft Cannabis Summit. And now we're going to be talking about the rise of the psychedelics industry. I have an amazing panelists set up for this conversation, and I would like to welcome everybody into the room, please. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming through. Some of everybody's coming from Israel, from America, and obviously locally here in South Africa. So I would like to first ask the first question with your introductions. What are psychotropic medicines and why are they important? And I think I would like Ronen to please start.
Thanks, Linda, and it's always great to be your local homie. Hi, everyone. I'm from Joburg, South Africa. And I think you've asked quite a deep question without even knowing, because it's a massive category of plant-based medicines that are produce psychedelic effects. And there's a huge family of medicines that are involved, and it's all about. And I think what we gathered here today is really to talk about how the rise of these plant-based medicines are really helping us cure a mental health crisis or the real global pandemic.
Also, thanks for that, Ronen. Can you also tell us your connection and how you are connected to this, and a little bit of background as to how you got connected into this industry?
Absolutely. I'm an entrepreneur in South Africa and involved in a number of startups in the psychedelic industry around the world. I am the local man for Psytech, and it's really great to share the stage with Chaim. I absolutely love Psytech, and my main mission is really to rewire the world through helping leaders and entrepreneurs to raise their consciousness. So that's my personal mission.
Beautiful, thank you so much. And can we get Dr. Knox also please to give yourself a little bit of an introduction, and also please the question about what are psychotropics and why is it's important for us to actually keep focus on them and interest.
Okay, very well. I'm Dr. Janice Knox. I live in Oregon, United States. I am a board-certified anesthesiologist and endocrinologist and cannabinoid medicine specialist. I'm a member of a family of 4 doctors, including my husband, my 2 daughters, and we make it our business to really present the physiology that was exposed by just dedicated researchers wanting to understand how cannabis worked. And so what we did was really focusing on the physiology, which led us to know that it's not just about cannabis, it's about any plant medicine that modulate that physiology. And when I say the physiology, I'm talking about the endocannabinoid system first, and then the more broader physiology of the endocannabinoid, which includes all those other receptors and mediators that allow us to see where and how, plant medicines work, including the psychedelics. And I see them as functional and structural substances that actually change the brain, leading to, spiritual enlightenment, a raise in consciousness, treating various mood disorders. So I see the psychedelics from a clinician point of view as another very valuable tool in the way we treat patients. I think it's going to disrupt, particularly in this, the psychiatry world, where conventional medicines are not as effective. And we're just back to what traditional medicine should be. So I look at them as traditional medicines versus conventional medicines. Now, we also, my family and I, we do what was called Pivotal EDU. And that's an education program we use to teach other clinicians of all denominations, whether MDs or DOs or naturopaths or chiropractors, about the physiology first, so they have a foundation to build any other information, including all plants, all botanicals, on the foundation of the science. We also run the American Cannabinoid clinics, where we actually see patients and talk to them about their traditional medicines that they want to use. And with that, I've seen just thousands of patients over the years to take care of those who have failed conventional medicines, or conventional medicines has failed them. So again, I see psychedelics as another valuable tool that is going to continue to allow us to disrupt the way healthcare is provided.
Thank you for that, Doctor. And Dr. Morsky, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky. I am a physician and attorney. I am president of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, and I host the Plant Medicine podcast. I would like to build on what the other two have said, because so far everybody's referred to them as plant medicines or plant-based medicines, and that is one nomenclature, plant medicine. But a lot of the psychedelics that we're talking about and that are going to be legal maybe faster than others and that are already legal, at least in the United States, are not plant medicines. They are synthetics, and they are still psychedelics and still extremely valuable, like ketamine and MDMA. And so for me, psychedelics are like this class of drugs that treats the core of a lot of what's going on in mental health and physical health instead of treating the symptoms. And that's why, for me, they're an incredibly efficacious and important class of medicines.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just as a bit of a clarification around plant versus synthetic, can you just quickly explain the difference between the two for those who don't understand?
Sure. So there are certain psychedelics, like psilocybin, for example, that's derived from a fungus. And so that is of a natural. And so a lot of times we roll even the fungus into plant-based, or like ayahuasca that comes from a vine, that comes from a plant. And then we have other ones like ketamine, MDMA, LSD that are synthesized in a lab. They may be synthesized from, there's an organic material somewhere in there, but they're mostly synthesized materials. And so, you know, the more you get into psychedelics, you hear some people are like synthetics versus naturals. And you'll hear many times in the United States that we have decriminalized natural entheogens. So that means that in certain cities, you can get ayahuasca and psilocybin, et cetera, and those are decriminalized, but still the LSD, the MDMA would not be. And so that's why there's a distinction there. And we're working toward, you know, that's always a discussion. Is one better than the other? How can we use both? And then also, how can we kind of keep them from being hierarchies? Because they all have a place in the healing.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Chaim, all the way out in Tel Aviv in Israel, please introduce us also.
Yeah, happy to be your homie from the Holy Land for this.
Indeed.
And first of all, before I answer the question, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be on a panel in Africa. I've spent the better part of a decade working all over the continent. I spent my career in healthcare, and I worked in infectious disease diagnostics and data, it's a pleasure to be speaking with a group in Africa. And once the pandemic permits, I look forward to being back. In answer to your question, I think it's the perfect place to start. The language we use matters, and it matters a great deal, especially when we're dealing with a class of molecules that were ridiculed, dismissed, and demonized via the war on drugs. So psychotropic, just to be precise with the language, psychotropic is a large word that encompasses any drugs that alter consciousness, state of mind, mood, and some people would even consider, you know, caffeine one of them. But psychotropics encompass the psychiatric drugs that have been in use for the last 20 or 30 years that like Prozac, like different barbiturates, all sorts of drugs used for the care of psychiatry. Psychedelics, though the definitions fluctuate, in common terms, it's about the profundity of that altered state of consciousness, that their consciousness expanding in an immediate and a profound way that creates not just new drugs for the use of psychiatry. The class of drugs we're talking about, the therapies that we'll be discussing, it's not a new pill like a new kind of Prozac. It's actually a new modality of care. It's a new way of treating mental illness. And I'm focused in that direction. There are wonderful uses for psychedelics for health and wellness. My company and our interest in Psytech is on the use of psychedelics in psychiatry to address a global crisis in mental illness, particularly anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, major depressive disorders that are profoundly harmful to society. So I'm CEO of a company called Psytech, and our focus is on three areas: building community around the medical uses of psychedelics to treat people acutely in need, Second is we operate a chain of clinics in the United States under the brand Tovana Clinics. And these are psychiatrist-run clinics in the United States, currently delivering ketamine, soon to be delivering other psychedelic drugs. And third is Tovana Solutions. So we created a software platform to enable healthcare providers to more quickly onboard these impactful therapies with best practice and best care in mind.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think I just want to dive a little deeper into some of the work that you all are busy with in regards to the psychotropic and psychedelic medicines that are being used. I think I'm going to direct my question to Dr. Knox around the therapies that you're using at your clinics. I mean, I did read up a little bit about this, actually quite deeply. And there's talk of like brain imagery being used to see the sort of results or the effects whilst people are on psychedelics, and they actually see a lot of lights light up in people's brains. And I just wanted to just talk about that and the brain regeneration and so on, because a lot of people are not aware of that aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, once again, I come from the cannabis space, so we really try to dig deeply and see how things work at the cellular and subcellular level. And what we've seen with the various studies is how, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, or in case of depression, you see, how there's been some retraction of those neurons. And so you're seeing neurogenesis, we see synaptogenesis, and the dendritic spines increasing in volume. So we actually see changes that occur quite quickly, as was pointed out. And even when we use like a single dose, a therapeutic dose, then we see long-lasting changes or long-lasting results, which is different from the conventional medicines we see, like the tricyclics or so the SSRIs, where we see very few patients have prolonged therapy. But these changes are actually, you can see them with the various studies that are being done, that these changes are actually real and happening. And even with microdosing, we see changes in the brain. So when I think of it as functional and structural changes, it explains why we get the duration of action from the results from improvement in behavior, whether it's PTSD or hard to treat depression, or even with some of my cancer patients, when I put them on a combination of CBD and one of the psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, we're seeing wonderful long-term results for those people.
Wow, that's very impressive and amazing. And also, Ronen, in terms of like being a startup entrepreneur, sort of like advisor and also mentor, how are you using the medicine like in your space?
So as you know, in South Africa, there's some medicines we can use and some that we can't. And so what I focus my time is building a community of entrepreneurs and leaders, and really working hard at breaking the stigma. And those that are interested and where applicable, we've been either running retreats or already working with medicines that we can, and it's provided astounding results.
Amazing. Can you also just elaborate a little bit about what sort of like the work that you do, obviously not disclosing everything else, so just an understanding of what are the possibilities that people can, achieve using this therapy? Yeah.
So just to highlight an example, I did some of this work in a legal zone, and I worked with a qualified facilitator for almost 2 days. And my own story is I battled in life with anxiety. I can't say if there's depression too, but certainly anxiety. And I worked for 2 days with a facilitator using multiple substances or tools. And really what I experienced over that time was what I called 40 lifetimes of therapy in 40 hours. And so having been in therapy for multiple seasons in my life, there was a limit to how far I could retrieve or the kind of content that I could work with. or that I could take to therapy. And when I started working with psychedelics, I really realized that I could go much deeper in myself, that I could resolve traumas that I didn't even know about, and I could really upgrade our operating system. I think that's the best way to say it. And what I found in my life subsequent to that is really wholesome changes. And so when you do the big work, when you take what they call the hero doses, and when you work at that level, you can really get some big changes in your system. And so I've had much less anxiety. I've been much better as a partner, as a husband, as a father, and I've seen a huge amount of good that it could bring to people. Because when you fix yourself, you fix the world.
May I pivot off of my friend and colleague Ronen?
Go for it.
Thank you. Because I've spent a great deal of time speaking with him about this and many others. My personal angle of approach was through PTSD. I'm a first-generation American, but I'm the child of two refugees. Basically, PTSD was the default mode for everybody that raised me. My family story is pretty much that of the horrors of Europe in the 20th century. That's all we knew. My father became a clinical psychologist as a result of what he and his family went through. And when you begin to read the studies, it's like the studies that took place between the 40s and 1970. It's like discovering a buried city. And then when you look at the studies that were done recently, so I just want to share a couple of numbers with you on about PTSD specifically, but the same incredibly effective, the same clinical efficacy is true for depression, for anxiety, but with PTSD in an aggregate of 6 studies that took place in the United States and Israel here, using MDMA, another in the family of psychedelics. After 2 sessions, 82% of the participants, these were mostly soldiers, but not exclusively, just people who suffered PTSD. You certainly need not be a soldier to experience PTSD. 82% experienced a marked decline in the rate of PTSD, and PTSD can be quantified on a scale. That's incredible. There's no therapy that even comes close to that kind of efficacy, 82%, but that's only half the story. 52% of the participants in the study, and this is an aggregate of 6 studies, 52% no longer registered as even having PTSD after a 2-dose therapeutic regimen. So you're talking about a week, maybe, depending how far apart you space these experiences. And that is beyond remarkable. And that's it's that clinical efficacy which I think has gone a good way towards demolishing the stigma amongst the medical community.
I've read those studies.
I'll pause there.
Very impressive. I've read those studies. Very impressive.
That's very interesting. I mean, also, I think, I mean, for me, if I can just add a personal story, I mean, also my big interest in the psychotropics and the psychedelics is around healing. And so, like, for example, I got a family member, my brother, who, suffers from bipolar and schizophrenia. And literally last week, I was talking to his psych ward team and discussing, psychotropic medicines, and they were quite open to the idea because there is a revolution, unrolling at the moment. And it's very interesting that a lot of people in the mainstream are also starting to plug in and actually start to investigate what can be used for their patients and what's viable and available. Dr. Morsky, could you please also just help us understand, like, how does it all work? Like, how does all this work? Like if conventional therapies have been around for so many years, but none of them are actually doing any real help. I mean, I know my brother has been on lithium forever, and he seems to be in homeostasis, but like, there's nothing in terms of developing to the next step. How does all the science work around the science of the medicine?
Well, a lot of what psychedelics do is they work on digging up the trauma that's at the core. And so if we're talking about receptors, a lot of them work on the serotonin receptor, some work on an Mdma receptor. There's different mechanisms, but it seems like one of the unifying factors is that a lot of these medicines are able to reveal to us, and that's why he probably said it felt like 40 years of therapy in 40 minutes, because things that talk therapy can't necessarily get to because they're stuck way back in our subconscious where we can't reach them. Psychedelics help dig those out and show them to us, because it's really hard to address traumas that we don't know are there, or that we've repressed so far that we can't, maybe our brain isn't even, it's like, especially with the PTSD, our brain isn't even letting us see them, but it's giving us the effects of feeling them all the time. You may have, nightmares and flashbacks, but you can't even really know what it is you're trying to address, and addressing it would be too painful. That's why MDMA is so helpful, because MDMA turns off the amygdala, the fear center, for a little bit, so that you can be less afraid of attacking these traumas and talking about them with a therapist. That's why it's so helpful, because what I want to say here is that these are not, you just take a psychedelic. All these studies that Chaim referenced, they are psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for the most part, especially the MDMA one. So it's not like they just went in and got 2 doses of MDMA. This is a months long period where they do psychotherapy, then they do an MDMA, then they do psychotherapy, then do another MDMA, they do more psychotherapy. It's part of talk therapy very often, but it makes the talk therapy so much more efficacious, because you're able to get to the things that are at the root cause that without them, years of talk therapy may never get to.
Sorry.
Yes, Jaime, no, please, you can add to that.
There was a wonderful, there's a wonderful analogy that I'm stealing from a great author. That it's, 100 years ago, you had Sigmund Freud, because there were no psychiatric drugs, and they came up. Some people, I'm a big fan of Carl Jung. People came up with wonderful models for human consciousness, how we work. 100 years later, you left the mind model, you went to the brain model. You're depressed, I'll give you something to keep your brain more awash in serotonin, a reuptake inhibitor, and you'll feel better. But you're not actually addressing the underlying issue. So it's like we went from mind model to brain model. This is a gross simplification, but useful to illuminate what Lynn Marie was saying. This is actually a mixture of the two. So you're using very potent drugs, but it's not about maintaining this level in your blood in perpetuity like it is with psychiatric drugs right now. It's using that drugs to open up a window. The analogy that's often used is one of a snow-covered hill. And when you're young, you can go down that hill any way you want. As you get older, there become ruts in the snow. You break it by demolishing your ego and altering your consciousness. You're allowing the opportunity. It's like fresh snow, fresh powder on the hill. You can go down in new ways. You can observe yourself in different ways. So it's about these potent molecules creating that opportunity for psychotherapy to be deeply effective. Going back to what Ronen said, 30 years of therapy in a couple of days. It enables something remarkable, and we're only now figuring out how to most effectively deploy it. So I think we're going to see the legalization of these drugs for therapeutic use, but I think the best practices in clinical care are going to evolve, which is why I'm so glad Lynn Marie is doing what she's doing. My clinics, our software solutions, we're going to be the recipients of all the good work from the people who are trying to figure out how to leverage these incredible tools for healing.
Well, one of the things I just want to add a little bit, can I add just a little bit to that? I think one of the things that I've learned with my cannabis experience is the reconnection of everything that needs to be reconnected to really truly heal the body. And for so long in conventional medicine, we separated things like spirituality and consciousness from other ailments of the body. And what we've learned by understanding, once again, the physiology, that all of those things are interconnected and extremely important. So when you're taking care of a patient, it is important for us to understand where they're sitting with their consciousness or their spirituality. And I think bringing these different old therapies back is allowing us to reconnect the body. And as far as the structural changes we're seeing, we don't see those with the conventional therapies for depression or PTSD. We don't see those structural changes that we're actually seeing with the psychedelics. And these changes, I think, is what explains why some of these patients get, effective benefits for 6 months, 8 months, or a year, and with very few sessions. And absolutely, yes, they need to be guided sessions, but they're getting just long-lasting relief from depression, and from PTSD. And I think it's because we actually are seeing those structural and functional changes in the brain.
Awesome. I think we touched on a little bit about the legislation because we're all coming from different territories. So it'll be very interesting to understand exactly what are the parameters in which we can operate in regards to using this medicine. So Ronen, you did mention that you were in a legal space that you were used for a guided experience. What is currently, I mean, as an individual, as a private individual, can I just walk up to someone and buy a bag of mushrooms and eat them? Or is there some sort of protocol that needs to be followed in regards to that in South Africa? I will ask the rest of the panel about, your different jurisdictions in your counties and states.
Yeah, so it definitely depends on where you are in the world. So if you are in Africa, you know the answer to that. Yes, you can go actually buy it. And even though they are a Schedule 1 substance, you could be arrested for having it. And the reason why they are in South Africa, this is an interesting thing, is when they were banned in the early 70s through the Nixon government, our government, or our previous government, the apartheid government, actually followed and just listed all the same drugs as harmful and made them illegal in our country. And right now, there is a legal team working on the decrim process. And so they're actually fighting for the constitutional right for individuals and what they call to self-elevate. Don't you think that's a cool term? So they're forcing the government to look at it, because up until now they've had absolutely no incentive to look at making these substances legal. And so to understand our region a little easier is at a legal level, most of the substances are still banned. On a street level, you just have to go to Cape Town and Joburg, and you'll find there's plenty of ceremonies happening on every weekend, and there's no shortage of places if you wanted to go have a ritual ceremony. So that's on the ritual side. What we do have on the clinical side is that iboga or ibogaine is legal in our country, and ketamine. And so through your psychiatrist, you're able to go and get both of those substances. And if I'm not mistaken, and I could be corrected, your psychiatrist could be able to administer MDMA too, but don't quote me on that one. But certainly the first two, very, very easily available, but under the care of your psychiatrist. And what's interesting, and I think it would be very beneficial to the viewers to understand, and perhaps Chaim or Dr. Morsky could speak about it, is where therapy is going. Because right now you're either going to your therapist or you're going to your psychiatrist. And when you go to your psychiatrist, you're generally going to get an SSRI or Western-based medicine prescribed to you. So you're going to get a pill, right? Where it's going in the future is through specific clinics. You'll be able to decide, depending on what I'm feeling and depending on what I'd like to solve, I could potentially have ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, or others, or ibogaine. And that would be administered with therapy. So it wouldn't just be about the substance, it would be about the pre and the post integration in terms of therapy. And then there's a whole set of technology solutions, and I'm going to leave that to Chaim to talk about.
Okay, cool.
In terms of legality and use right now I'll speak about North America. Right now in North America, the only legal psychedelic assisted therapy is that of ketamine, and it's a strange quirk of the American system, which is full of strange quirks. That it's the off-label use of a drug that, as another good doctor on our panel will attest, was been used for 50 years as an anesthetic. It's incredibly useful for psychiatric care doesn't change the on-label use of the drug as being for anesthesia. So we're in a situation where I think the number is something like 1,500 ketamine clinics in the United States now treating people psychiatrically with this drug. None of it is reimbursed by insurance yet. So people who are seeking this care psychiatrically are paying cash on the barrel. I think that'll be the next considerable step in the United States, will be the insurance companies beginning to code up ketamine for use. There's a whole process involved in that, of course, but that will cause wider use for people in need and for people who can't afford the anywhere from $400 to $1,200 ketamine infusions. There's one nasal delivery method which is lower dose, and then there's very few people who are practicing intramuscular ketamine, which is very high dose. What's coming next is MDMA assisted psychotherapy, the studies I cited, and they're in the third of 3 human trials of the FDA's process. And what's interesting to note is that the FDA granted breakthrough drug status to MDMA. And that's not just a superlative like we use in technology world. Breakthrough means immediately jumping to human trials. It's shortcutting of a very long process. And I think the forecast from MAPS now is we won't leave 2022 without MDMA being federally legalized for therapeutic use. And I think that's also due in no small part to the fact that the veterans groups in the United States have been agitating for it as well. In Canada, psilocybin has already been granted compassionate care use for end-of-life care. And in the great state of Oregon, I think there's 9 states that have decriminalized psilocybin, but decriminalization is different from the medical use. You could still lose your medical license in a decriminalized state if you use something that's not approved for therapeutic use. Oregon has approved for therapeutic use, so I think other states will follow.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, please
cities,
jump in.
not states, not 9 states. 9
How many
cities.
is it? Cities.
Yeah,
Thank you.
states have decriminalized psilocybin besides Oregon.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Oregon passed their 109 this past year.
Well, Oregon passed 109 that will medicalize it, and then 110 decriminalized it up to 12 grams. So it's a little bit of a hybrid model there. So like if you have 20 grams of psilocybin and you're not getting it through a clinic, then you can still be prosecuted. Sorry.
Leave it to the non-federalized nature of America's municipal and state governments to lead the way. Same as with cannabis when it comes to psilocybin. And then, of course, I'll let others speak about other parts of the world, like places in Western Europe and the Caribbean, where the retreats exist today. One other important thing I do want to mention on the legal side is people are already, people with the means are traveling to seek care. So I just spoke yesterday with a fantastic company that's leveraging ibogaine, which is just a remarkably effective therapy for substance abuse disorders, for addictions. And Mexico has there's ayahuasca retreats in a lot of places, but ibogaine specifically for addiction therapy in Mexico has experienced a real surge over the last several years based on efficacy, based on the fact that it works.
That's beautiful. And thanks for that. Those insights are quite important for, I think, people to understand sort of like the legal landscape that the psychotropics sit on. Dr. Mursky, you also have a law degree. I think I remember reading that in your bio.
I do.
And that probably helps if you get into any problems with authorities or any sort of like law enforcement. How has it been in terms of practicing with this therapy within your practices?
I don't at all. So just to clarify, I do not practice with these medicines at all whatsoever. I'm president, so I should have done a better bio of myself, but I'm president of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, and our goal is to educate primary care providers, other frontline medical providers on the currently available and upcoming psychedelic medicines. Because, for example, like my training is in family medicine and sports medicine. So family medicine doc is generally who in the US you have to go to first if you're having any kind of issue. And if somebody comes to a family medicine doctor and says, I'm sad, I'm anxious, I'm having nightmares that sound like PTSD, I want those doctors to know that psychedelics are an option so that they can refer to a ketamine clinic or refer to a psilocybin provider when that's available, refer to an MDMA therapist once that's FDA approved. And I want them to be able to have that conversation with their patients. And so that's my role in this. Is I do not practice it personally. My job is as an educator of other physicians so that we can get, because once, like, you know, when Chaim talks about when the FDA approves these, it doesn't do any good if your average doctor doesn't know about them. And it's going to be quite a while before they make it to the medical school curriculum. And your average doctor learns about them just in our normal training. So we have to go in and educate doctors so that we can start having these conversations with our patients, because 80%, something like 80% of antidepressant prescriptions are written by primary care doctors. And so we need those doctors to know, hey, there are other, maybe more efficacious options out there. And I'm going to touch on something Chaim also said, that I also thought there were no ketamine clinics that are being reimbursed. I found out last week there are Texas and Colorado clinics that have somehow found out a way to get Medicaid to reimburse. So there are like a handful of clinics in the US that now have reimbursement, but that's something that definitely needs to be expanded, because at the end of the day, we can't have this be another thing that only the wealthy people of means who can travel or who can pay for thousands of dollars for ketamine.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another big mission of the Psychedelic Medicine Association, is like, tell doctors they exist, facilitate the ability to have a conversation with patients, and then work with our partner organizations to get these covered so that patients actually have access to them, patients all across the spectrum.
No, thank you for that. I think I would like also to touch on a few things, which I'm sure it's in the tips of the minds of the people right now, is also looking at the recreational side of the psychotropic and psychedelic medicines. I mean, obviously here in South Africa at the moment, with cannabis, I mean, there's a huge sort of like legislative like battle that's happening. We've sort of won in a way, but now obviously looking, you know, into other like aspects of it. And just to touch on the actual, you know, recreational use of it, is it advisable? And if so, and if not, I mean, what are the parameters that we need to set up if people want to indulge in using psychedelic medicines for recreational use? And I open this up to anyone who feels that they've got a good point to put in.
I'll just start by saying, like, recreational versus non is kind of like drawing another dichotomy that we, in the psychedelic world, we're trying to kind of blend into more of responsible versus, like, say, less responsible use. Because the first time I did a psychedelic, it was technically recreational, but I had such a therapeutic realization that now, was it recreational? Was it therapeutic? And so essentially now the discussion is doing these things consciously. Like, do we set an intention beforehand? Do we have a sitter? That's a big thing. Like, harm reduction is big, because if you're going to do these without being part of a formal therapeutic situation, you're going to do them at home, etc. Then do you have harm reduction techniques in place? Do you have a guide or a sitter there with you, somebody who is sober, who knows the medicine, who can handle if an issue comes up, who can discuss things with you? Because as these move forward, it's important on a personal level that everybody stays safe, and on a overall level, because you know how much stigma these have, because one person took LSD and jumped off of out of a hotel room. In Holland, psilocybin is illegal except for truffles, because one woman died when taking, a French visitor died when taking psilocybin. So irresponsible use is bad for the user and bad for the collective. And so we're just encouraging the most responsible use possible.
I just want to add a little bit to that too. It's the same argument we have with the recreational use of cannabis and the medical use of cannabis. Cannabis is cannabis, CBD is CBD, and oftentimes people are using it because the body calls for it. So it's an education not only of the clinicians, but we also need to educate the public on safe use, or when or where and how they should use these various, what I call disruptive tools to bring them back to health or wellness. Well people can very, very much use it, particularly in the time now when we're living in COVID times and stress, political, all this. You can imagine how depressed these people are. If they understand how to use it in a safe way, like micro dosing, that doesn't necessarily need a guided approach. But if you're using a huge hallucinogenic approach, you definitely need that guided approach. And so there's education that needs to be done on both sides of the equation. The patient population, to get rid of stigma and to teach them safe ways that's possible for them to use if they want to use it at home. And then the clinicians and the consumer that needs the hallucinogenic dosages to correct a problem. So I think it's even bigger than what we're talking about.
Yeah, just building on that.
Yes, please.
I think there's responsible and irresponsible, but I think what could really bring down the psychedelic revolution is if at every family barbecue and get together, the decision is, should we have wine tonight or should we do shrooms? And I think if we get to that stage, it's going to bring down the house. And one of my teachers in the US actually explained it in a cool way. He said, like, when we're taking these substances as an exit or as an escape, it's usually like buying a one-way airplane ticket. And so, if you're buying a return ticket, that you're taking this with the right intention for growth purposes, to really expand your self-knowledge and to expand your consciousness. And what you bring back is part of the return ticket. And it's a very good way to decipher which trip are you on, a return ticket or a one-way. And I think to have this conversation and to be promoting, or we promote a recreational or therapeutic use, I certainly am very, very much for the therapeutic use. What could be an interesting discussion after this is it going to be medical, or what about rituals and ceremonies?
Absolutely.
And non-medical use, but it's still safe, supported with post-integration.
You're going to always have those that are going to abuse the product. We're going to have those, just like we're always going to have the synthetics. There's no stopping it. It's going to happen. It's a matter of how do we use those synthetics. I prefer natural, because I believe the further you get away from natural, the more side effects and problems you see. And we learned that with single molecular medicines, the synthetics, we
Absolutely.
see problems, but it doesn't mean they're not coming, and it doesn't mean they can't be useful. Once again, it's someone's going to always abuse it. There's always going to be synthetics. It's something we have to learn to live with and educate the best we can.
I agree with you completely. There's a certain hubris to thinking that you've isolated the mechanism and the molecule amongst a complex plant medicine in an unbelievably complex system like the human body, let alone mental health and of the human body. I'll refrain from my own comments from just an observation that amongst a lot of the drivers of legalization for the medicinal use, you don't hear talk about recreation. And I actually do not believe, because I know a lot of these people personally, I know that it's not because of personal conviction against recreation or personal use or the seeking your own health and wellness personally. I think what's driving a lot of the absence of any talk of recreation or non-medical use is the fact that even though stigma has been receding on the medical use because of just overwhelming empirical evidence that this is incredibly helpful, people don't want to risk the progress we're making now by using the word recreation recklessly. There is a genuine fear that talk of even how to manage recreational use could cannibalize the progress on the medical use. So it's observation. Even though stigma is in decline, the work of Lynn Marie's organization, mine and Ronen's organization, Cheeba, is really important still. Like we're not nowhere near over the hump as far as that's concerned.
No, 100%. And I mean, I think also another aspect that I think it's important to go into is the spirituality of, the medicine helping to guide you to a better understanding of your own consciousness, and I guess also of the rest of the human beings that are in this world. Because I mean, that's something that Ronen and I touched on the first time we met, actually, and he got me onto like an interesting journey about understanding, the work that is possible using this medicine. And that's something I sort of want to actually go into a little bit deeper. What would be the scenario that we would have to paint in order to get all the world leaders, to partake in using the therapies, and what kind of world could we imagine if that could take place?
I think
Again,
that would involve kidnapping, which I'm not sure is legal.
I would say money. Money will get them moving on it. I have some statistics here I want to read, and I can't remember where I got these statistics from. But for example, in 2020, a pharmaceutical company patented psilocybin for depression, and that company is now valued at $1.5 billion. And the estimate for where this can go with 264 million people worldwide with depression as a disability. This is the World Health Organization saying that amount of money is worth 200 billion globally.
Sure.
That's going to drive it. Pharmaceutical companies, and I have some concerns about that, because these plant-based medicines, whether you get your psychedelics from an animal or a plant or a fungus, these are rituals and IP really that belong to the indigenous people of various countries. And they're being, They're being, used. Their IP is being taken away from them, and they're not getting any benefits from this $200 billion. And to me, that goes back to, understanding that that you have to be ethically and morally, and think about the economics of the people who use these plants and things for centuries as their special rituals and their spiritual and religious rituals, and now it's being sort of kidnapped, and you get pharmaceutical companies getting patents on something that belongs to the people. And I think we'd be remiss not to understand what's happening globally and not address that.
I would hate to see a world that big pharma takes over this industry and treats it the same as the current pharmaceutical industry. I would love to see a world where world leaders look at this as a crucial way to one's self-actualization and growth, and also kind of letting go of the baggage that everyone's carrying. And if you if you can imagine, if anyone's ever had their own psychedelic experience, and hopefully you come out of there lighter, kinder, and less anxious. And if you think of 1 million people that do that, 10 million people that do that, 100 million people that do that, and with that, world leaders, imagine the kind of decisions that will be made in the world from a different heart space, head space, and from a different level of consciousness. And we can actually rebuild a world that actually makes sense. So that would be the end game. But we've got a lot to do, and there will be many wolves at the door trying to prevent or trying to preserve the status quo.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's wise.
So was that Chaim? Missed that?
Oh, just agreeing. I think it's wisely put. The fantasy of getting world leaders to have these experiences notwithstanding, but there's a deeper question in there, which is, what do these experiences do to people spiritually? Which is where your inquiry, where your question started, and there seems to be a certain uniformity to connectivity, to a humbling of the supremacy of the ego long after the experience is over. Mm-hmm. It's not ego elimination. Ego has a place, but it seems to be put in its right place. A general connectivity to life in general, let alone your co-travelers in your species. That's just seems good. Just a positive impact. So Anyway, just agreeing. Now I'm just repeating what my colleagues on the panel said.
No, we're all part of the mycelium network. It's fine. That's great. So I just want to just understand also, like, looking forward as to what would you think would be the best sort of like scenario going forward, like in terms of us realizing a world where psychotropic medicine is accepted like a paracetamol at the local chemist or the local general dealer shop. Like what do we need to put in place in order for these things to sort of occur in our world, so to speak?
This is so much more potent than paracetamol. I'm with you up until that last piece of the analogy.
I'm not sure we want that world.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to drive on the streets of that world. But I think I think what we can hope for, and indeed what makes this industry so hopeful, is the wind is at our backs finally. Like there's an equation. It starts with a tragedy, and that is absolute epidemic proportions of mental pathology in society today. Like astonishing. We don't talk in epidemiological terms about it because it's not viral, it's not past, it's not zoonotic jumps. But in terms of the numbers in society and where it's heading, it's absolutely an epidemic and a terrifying one. That's the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is there's no shortage of money. You look at the hundreds of billions spent on mental health care. The problem is the solutions that money is being spent on is wanting. And the third part of the equation is you have a mental health world. I'll leave drug companies out for a minute, notwithstanding. People who are seeking to heal, whether it's therapists or whether it's board certified psychiatrists, they're suffering because they don't like to see patients fail, of course. So into that equation comes psychedelic assisted therapies, in which cannabis has already paved the road on stigma in a very good way. You have incredible empirical evidence from the finest institutions in the land, from Hopkins to Imperial to NYU. You have psychedelic research institutes opening up all over the place. And you have governments now fast-tracking these therapies through. That's a great equation. So if I agree about the peril that was mentioned earlier, if we can do this industry properly, if we can keep an ethos of doing well and doing good at the same time at the center of what we do, and don't operate in a traditional big pharma way, then I think the future is for this will be bright. And bright, my definition of bright is dealing with that tragic crisis that I started with. And that's just what my focus is. There's other people more well-suited than me, certainly even on this panel, to talk about the benefits that would mean for that terribly named group, healthy normals. For people without pathology, how they could benefit from the use of psychedelics. But I'll leave that to others.
Please jump in. Anyone that feels sort of like the roadmap or the plan, do you feel that we need to implement to realize this?
Well, I would just ask anybody out there if they feel comfortable having a conversation with their physician or their clinician, whoever they see, to mention psychedelics and get that ball rolling, because that's who needs, I would love to give it all to all the politicians, but I would also love to give it to all the doctors and have them realize the power and how much more efficacious this is, because, a ton of doctors are also on the antidepressants that everybody else is on, and they know that they're not that efficacious. And if we could experience it for ourselves, or even learn about it and make that a more real option for our patients. Ketamine is available now in a lot of places, so start there. But, in a year or two, when Mdma is available, and in Oregon, where medicalized psilocybin will be available in 2 years as well, like, we need to have the people who are the shepherds of other people's mental health knowing about these. And so it's hard for me to exactly envision what it looks like with, right now you've got Holland where you can buy truffles, and I don't know that the entire country is going to hell in a handbasket. Like, I think, people find responsible ways, the majority of them, to deal with things. And then hopefully look at the states where cannabis is legalized. Cannabis at very high doses, especially edibles, can be very psychedelic. I have practitioner friends who do ketamine and cannabis assisted psychotherapy, And yet, you know, we're doing okay in California and the other states where things have been recreational legalized. So I just think it takes a lot of education, so that the more we educate, the more we can make these things available for responsible use. I mean, most of these psychedelics are significantly more safe than alcohol and tobacco. They're less addictive. They are, most of the things you don't want, you know, LSD, it's like a 10-hour trip. How often can you even do that? You know, like it's not like alcohol, you can just have it every night kind of thing. I mean, that would take up most of your life. And so there's just a different paradigm. So I think we need to work on educating people on safe and responsible use. So I would love that if there's just kind of like with the current medical model, there's certain things you need to get through a physician, but there's other ways to get different versions of those, because we know, at least in our country, and I'm sure many countries that are listening, there's a long history of racism that has made certain classes more leery of going through the medical system. And I completely understand why. And so we love having things like decriminalized nature, where people can grow their own mushrooms and take them, you know, to their own guide and do responsible use that doesn't have to go through the medical system. As long as we're all being responsible, there should be different community and medical and personal ways to get these medicines for everybody.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that. I think what's really important to allow people to grow their own. And we're seeing that with cannabis in Oregon, but people are starting to grow their own mushrooms. And there is some pushback against that. And I think that's the wrong direction to go. I think people should be allowed to grow their own. And as long as they're educated, they understand, you know, some of the, you know, the risks and benefits, I think that we should not take that right away from people.
Beautiful. I think. Sorry, Chaim.
No,
please
no, I was just saying amen. Please go on. Yeah. I love your t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah, spirituality. Yeah, I think. I mean, looking at the landscape currently now with Corona, like affecting the world, I think it's interesting that, you know, this sort of like topical issue or topical subject is bringing into the fore a lot of things that people don't discuss. And mental health, I believe, is something that people seem to oversee or overlook because it's hidden within. And being able to bring that out, you know, using these therapies, I think is really important. And I think, I mean, looking at the time now, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. But I think looking at where we should be going and what currently is the vision, what's this next step now? And what in your own context are you going to try to realize that? Dr. Knox, I can start with you.
Well, for me, you know, I'm all about education as well, and educating other providers. And I don't really care what the initials are behind their names, because if you're doing anything for health, then you need to know something about that physiology that you're working on. And so once again, my job is to educate and to understand the best use. When do you want to use ketamine or MDMA or, you know, ibogaine or any of those others? When do you want to use? There's times when one is better than the other. And so for me, it's really getting folks to understand, you know, why this product works and why this is so disruptive to the way we've done healthcare in the past. And I think, once again, both sides of the equation. I need patients to understand, consumers to understand, and I need clinicians to understand. And I think it's once we start there, and I think it should be led by clinicians, because patients still want to have confidence in us. They still do. And we need to rise to the occasion when we have drug our feet on everything. And so I think physicians should be screaming the loudest why this should be acceptable a care for them and not have their hands tied.
Awesome. Ronen?
Yeah, I don't think this is going to follow a logical path. I think this is something that we need to be working on at multiple levels. So from research to legislation to one-on-one conversations to speaking to your doctor to wherever you can. And I think it's going to be, it's creating this kind of tidal wave that will all come together at a later stage. But it requires all of us to be working at multiple levels on any given day. One thing that I would like to say to everyone, and sorry if this sounds bit crazy, but if you do want to try psychedelics, I call it almost the gateway drug of psychedelics is actually conscious breath work. And if you really want to get a sense of what it's like to be in an altered state of consciousness, start in the safe place. And if you can find a breathwork class, that is the first place you should start to get a feel of how you would be under an altered state. and then to ease onto it under managed care. And so that's my message to everyone.
Beautiful. So sorry, I think I can squeeze one more or two more in. Chaim, please. Yeah, Psytech.
Yeah, I do have to. I apologize. I do have to jump, but I just want to echo. It's a pleasure sitting on this panel again. Thank you for the invitation. Education. I'll follow that theme because it's so crucial. I'm also pleased to say that we're working with Cheeba. Cheeba's making our education course, The Fundamentals of Psychedelic Medicine, available in Africa. And we chose to create that course just for the reasons that were described earlier. We want to give both clinicians and patients seeking care, I shouldn't even say patients, people seeking care, a resource to go and see what the empirical data says today, where we stand. So anecdotal evidence is fantastic and compelling, and the research evidence is convincing. That should be made more broadly available, and we're doing our part. And I thank Cheeba for helping us.
Thank you much for that. Thank you so much, everybody, for being available. I know all of you, some of you had to wake up really early for this, and really appreciate that. And going forward, we hope to have more and many more conversations around this subject, because I think it's something that's not going away. And then also for the people who are interested in the next panel that's coming up, it's music and cannabis, and we have AKA and the Kiffness featured in there. We want to thank Psytech for sponsoring this panel, and also our other headline sponsors such as Druid's Garden and Grow One Africa. Thank you very much. So we'll see you all hopefully soon. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.